All right, it seems that we are live. I'll take a few seconds for a technical check. I'd like to ask a confirmation from Lenke that everything works as it should. You can hear me well, you can see me, lighting, screen, all the technical things are working properly. So I'll wait a second until she confirms. And it seems sound is going to EU training end. Excellent. So why don't you get warmed up and tell us where you are dialing in from? I can see a few comments already coming in from France, from Greece, from Spain, from Belgium, Bulgaria, from Poland, Brussels. We usually play this competition of who's dialing in from the furthest away. And let's see who gets to win that. Okay, nobody from extremely far away. Probably Greece is the winner so far. So we'll see who else might be joining, whether it's Ireland or Greece, depending on your perspective or your current location. So with that, why don't we get started? And it's a warm welcome from me live from Brussels, from our studio here at the Ambiorix Center that we are using for all the webinars. And we're also making it available for EPSO candidates, by the way. If you need a soundproofed and well-lit, calm space for your interview, that's something you might want to consider. So with that, my name is András Baneth, and I will walk you through today the 2021 Lawyer-Linguist competitions, because there are quite a few perks and details to bear in mind. But before anything else, let's do a quick sound check. I think we've already done that. Hopefully it works on everyone's end. If you have any technical difficulties, please just restart your browser. It usually resolves 99% of the problems. And if you have any other technical problems, Lenke and Veronica, who are kind enough to assist us from afar, from Budapest, they will be happy to help. And you might want to switch a device. There are different apps for Click Webinar. All you need is the meeting code. You need to enter that and you can follow it on a second device if your computer doesn't work for whatever reason. So with that, I won't bore you with my background. Some of you might know the Ultimate EU Textbook that I co-authored and authored, depending on which edition we talk about. And I'm one of the two co-founders of EU Training and speak often about EPSO issues. So in case you miss this webinar in terms of some part of it, because I assume you are following me live at this point, but if for whatever reason you need to step away, then the recording will be shared with you and you'll receive that along with the slides and obviously with all the necessary information that I will cover. And you will also receive a transcript after a couple of days. As soon as we get to it, you can read that on the website later on. And if you're watching this as a recording, you are still very welcome to send us via email through the contact form any question you may have related to the Lawyer-Linguist competitions, or for that matter, any other EU career option. So with that, let's look at the actual background, how we come to deal with the EPSO issues and what we offer for your preparation. A few words about EU training. So we have a growing and a pretty robust community who are all passionate about EU careers. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of our clients, former clients, who have passed competitions, and they follow all the developments that we share with them. I encourage you to join our Facebook community, and you might want to check out the different test packages that we have on hand. We have a database of 25,000 questions and growing, and over 17 million questions have been used, which I find a pretty fascinating number personally. And there are a huge number of webinars you might want to check out. A lot of them are free. Similarly to today's edition, there is a transcript, the slides are available, and there are a lot of methodology webinars as well, where you can learn about the exams, you can learn about best practices of the computer-based tests or best practices related to the assessment center. And actually, we just did a Q&A webinar the other day. Some of you may have participated on the assessment center, and more specifically on the situational competency-based interview, which is the newest addition to the mix. And then, yeah, I won't say anything more about the webinars. You are welcome to check those out. And just to highlight that there's a special exclusive offer that we give you, all of those who are following this live edition. And very shortly after, you can take advantage of a special discount that we give for our online services. So with that, let's get into the lawyer-linguist competitions. And here comes the caveat. Some of you might know, others may not, that I actually used to be a lawyer-linguist. So this is pretty close to my heart in many ways. There's a lot of interesting emotions and memories. I worked as a lawyer-linguist at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg back in 2004 until 2007. So I have a first-hand experience of what it means to be a lawyer-linguist. Slightly different if you are working in the European Parliament, slightly different if you are at the court, and slightly different if you are at the European Commission or at the Council of the EU. And yet, there are obviously a lot of similarities. So very happy to share those ideas with you. And again, if you have questions about the nature of the job, I'm more than happy to answer those. First question, perhaps, is where are you going to work? So the answer to that, formally or in formal terms, probably Brussels, probably Luxembourg, and probably not Strasbourg, even though legally speaking, you probably will be traveling there if your employer is the European Parliament. So you might be requested or instructed to travel to Strasbourg if and when the live meetings resume there, even though right now there is a partial physical presence of the members of the European Parliament, but for staff, it's highly, highly limited of those who are actually traveling. But then again, typically your place of work will be Brussels or possibly Luxembourg, depending on which institution you end up working for. But the chances are, in, again, very practical terms, is that you will work in Brussels. So with that, what is it that you actually do? What is required of you as a lawyer-linguist? What are the tasks? So it's all in the notice of competition, and we put that on the screen for the sake of completeness and for the sake of accurate information. But basically, you are revising and quite possibly, translating EU legal text. So you are a lawyer and a linguist. That's a proofreader, translator, reviser, a linguistic coordinator based on the combination of languages you have, and you deal with EU legislation of all sorts. So one day you might be actually translating a notice of EPSO competition. The other day you will be dealing with the directive on the single-use plastics. And the next day it might be a court decision that you are requested to revise or perhaps translate or proofread. So these are the tasks which are centered around your legal knowledge and your linguistic competence. And then here are the main tasks. So checking, drafting, legislative drafting, and looking also at the formal rules of decision-making procedure or legislative process. So this is information that's helpful. This is information that's necessary for your preparation, because you need to have a good understanding of all these topics already for your exam. That is something I will come back to, and to discuss. To what degree do you need to know about the EU, about EU law, about national law, and similar matters? And then perhaps last but not least, you have, so the work involves frequent contact with various participants in the legislative process. So there's quite a bit of coordination work that you are requested to do. Okay, now I see that the sound is clear and real time, and everything seems to be working fine, but there is a slight lag between my video feed and what I might be covering. Hopefully that doesn't cause too much trouble. Anyways, the most important is perhaps my explanation and what you see on the screen, and my nice background, and me personally, I'm of secondary importance in this live session. It's really the information that I'd like to share with you that matters the most. So with that, how many positions are out there? Probably all of you know, you've seen the notice of competition. So we listed that on the screen, that there are quite a number of languages. 6 languages are being sought. So the EPSO is running selection process for these 6 languages. So it says Bulgarian, Czech, French, Polish, Irish, and Hungarian. The number of laureates, so number of places on the reserve list, is not huge, unfortunately. So that is certainly a challenge, that you want to be among the best. But at this point, at this stage in the process, I really encourage you to focus on the first step. Take it one step at a time and make sure that you are really focusing on the next phase ahead of you, which in your case will be the pre-selection phase after you've completed the application process. So with that, let's just look at the application deadline, really to emphasize the date. It's the 23rd of February, so a little over a month from today. And make sure you don't leave your application to the last moment. So make sure that you fill in the EPSO profile, all the application checkboxes and whatever is needed in time and not in the last moment. Give it sufficient thought. Make sure that you read everything. After all, we're talking about a lawyer-linguist competition, so accuracy, correct spelling, proper written expression are even more important than for other competitions. Make sure that you hand in a proper, neat-looking application on time. So main question perhaps, are you eligible? What are the eligibility criteria? You have the classic ones, which you can see on the screen. You need to be an EU citizen. You need to have completed military service, which is compulsory only in a handful, even a small handful of EU member states. In most others, this is not an issue. And then last but not least, you need to have met the character requirements for the job. So you don't have a criminal record or anything that might call into question whether you are eligible for a competition. So language rules, perhaps this is one of the most crucial and one of the most important aspects of the competition. How do you choose languages? What rules apply? The first point is that some time ago, a couple of years ago, thanks to court cases from different member states, they really decoupled, separated your citizenship and your linguistic knowledge. So if you happen to be Romanian and you're fluent in perhaps Romanian, or maybe you actually lived your entire life in France, so you have a Romanian passport, but your sort of main language, I would even call it mother tongue, is actually French. And then you also speak Swedish and English. What can you do with this mix? So your passport only matters to the extent that you are an EU citizen. Beyond that, it has no relevance to choosing a language. What does matter is actually which languages do you speak and on which level. And then, as we will see, another aspect will be what degree do you have, and especially you need to have a law degree, which again can be from any EU member state, as long as it meets the formal criteria for a legal degree. So let's go back to the language issues and the language rules. So let me put a couple of ideas there. We're essentially talking about three languages: language 1, language 2, language 3. And language 1, as you see on the screen, it's the language of the competition. So if it's Bulgarian, if it's French, if it's Hungarian, any other language, that's that's a C2 level. It's a near perfect knowledge. So that's a sort of a fluency in a given language. Then you have language 2, which must be English. Cannot be French, cannot be Spanish, cannot be any other language. It must be English. So that's a pretty strict, clear, direct rule. And then you have language 3, which can actually be any of the EU's 24 official languages, as long as it's different from language 1 and 2. So the language 1 is you essentially you choose that on the basis of which competition you apply for. Language 2 is English, and language 3 is any other. So perhaps going back to my previous example, language 1, let's say you're applying for a French lawyer-linguist, because regardless of which passport you hold, as long as it's an EU passport, regardless of which EU country's passport you hold, you speak French as a native, on a native level, and you probably got your legal degree in France. So you probably would choose the language 1 and go for the French lawyer-linguist competition. And then for language 2, that's English, it's clear. And then language 3 can be any other EU language. So it could be Spanish, it could be Romanian, it could be Finnish, any other EU language, as long as it's different from the other 2. So make sure that you carefully think about the languages and also in relation to which law degree you hold, because these are closely connected. And then, yeah, language 1, 2, 3 must be different, as I said before. And then comes the qualifications. So you need to have completed a university degree in law. And then in the notice of competition, you'll notice that there's a list of the title of the degree that you need to have, which is pretty standard in every EU country. I know the Hungarian one because I got my legal degree there, but the same applies to all the other countries. So make sure that you look at that. And if there's any doubt, you might want to ask EPSO or the selection board, and making sure that if perhaps, I'm not sure what the rule would be if you had obtained a law degree outside of the EU. Can you make an equivalence? That could be a pretty complicated case, because they might not fully accept that this is an equivalent of an EU degree. And especially in the context of the current competition, you might not qualify. So the rule seems to be that as long as you have that official denomination, that official title on your degree that they list in the notice of competition, that's the only kind of degree that is accepted for the purposes of this lawyer-linguist exam. And then, very interestingly, you are not required to have any professional experience. If you just graduated a couple months ago, or perhaps now, though I don't know if graduations do happen in the middle of the year, as long as you have completed your degree, you do not need to present any professional experience, which is pretty outstanding. So think about it. Most competitions with no professional experience, they are launched on 85 level. So that is the entry level for those with a university qualification. And in this case, for lawyer-linguists, you actually have 87 level. So this is 2 steps higher than the so-called normal entry level in most competitions. So you get this really great benefit, both in terms of salary, it means at least 1,000 euros more monthly salary. And then number 2, in terms of your progress, in terms of your career prospects, you get to start at 2 levels higher up than most people. Now, so to say, the price of this is that you're a lawyer-linguist. So you are probably required, whether formally or informally, but you are probably required to stay in the job for a while, even if you wish to transit into a different career path inside the institutions, because you're given this extra head start compared to most others. And what it means in practice, usually to go from one grade to another, so from 85 to 86, typically it takes 3 years. So you are given almost 6 years of advantage in terms of career progress compared to most others for lawyer-linguist competitions. So that's an interesting aspect of this exam. And actually, it was the same case back then for us. I had also started at that level when I started working at the European Court of Justice. So with that, let me take a quick look at some questions, and I'm peeking to the right side. That's where Lenka is kind enough to feed the questions to me. So let me see, can I apply for a position in the coming competition if I'm already in the middle of the recruitment process from last year, lawyer-linguist for Luxembourg? That's interesting. So without knowing further context, you mentioned you're in the middle of the recruitment process. So if you're actually being hired and you're going to start working presumably as a lawyer-linguist in Luxembourg, I would presume you are on 87 level and being hired. So if it's the same level, I'm not sure what's your interest in actually applying for pretty much the same kind of competition. If your interest is working rather in Brussels instead of Luxembourg, then perhaps you can work it out at your new workplace if you can transfer after a year or 2 years, if there is some way. Other than that, I don't really see the benefit. But in formal terms, in terms of whether it's allowed that you apply for this competition, yes, you are. So the main rule is you can apply for as many competitions, EPSO competitions, as you like, unless it's explicitly forbidden in the notice of competition. So in the current case, you can only apply for one of the 6 languages, so one of the 6 tiers of this particular competition. You cannot apply for French and Hungarian or Irish at the same time. You need to pick one. But as long as it's a separate competition and you qualify for agricultural experts, which is a competition coming out soon, or nuclear scientist or secretary, again, as long as you qualify, you're free to apply for those. Here's another one. I'm finishing my legal studies soon, most probably by the end of the EPSO selection process. Will they allow me to take part? I would need to double check the notice of competition, because often EPSO would say you need to obtain your legal degree by the end of the process, by the end of the selection process. Now, I'm not sure whether in this particular case, which rule they say, that whether you need to be in possession of your diploma right now or at the deadline for the application, or at a certain date in the near future. So this should be in the notice of competition, and I encourage you to check it out. Perhaps we will also look into it, or if Lenka has a moment, or Veronica, they could look it up and put the answer into the chat box. And then question 3, is relevant experience an advantage or not? Typically, it is an advantage. It does help if you have that sort of relevant experience, because you're currently working as a legal translator, perhaps as a freelancer, perhaps with a translation bureau, perhaps in your current job, you're working in a public administration where you deal with many of these aspects that the future job, with the idea that you're going to succeed in the competition, but with that the future job will entail. So those can help your recruitment chances. And I'd like to emphasize, for those of you who are not intimately familiar with this terminology, EPSO does selection. So they would select suitable candidates and in the end place you on the reserve list. In the end, once you are on the reserve list, that's when the recruitment starts, that you are actually going to be able to find a specific job. So having some relevant experience helps you at the recruitment phase. But when it comes to the competition, it's an equal chance opportunity, where no matter what your professional background is, you are all measured on the same metrics at the competition. So with that, why is it a great opportunity? I probably don't need to preach to the converted. Certainly very attractive salaries, as I mentioned before, given the 87 status and the salary that comes with that. And certainly lots of benefits in terms of insurance and European schools and childcare and all the other things that EU officials are entitled to based on the staff regulations. So how to actually apply for this and how to succeed in the competition. So certainly you need to start with an EPSO profile, and you declare your eligibility, and you pick your language 1, 2, and 3 based on the principles and the rules that I discussed. Then comes the application, actually submitting the application before the deadline, 23rd of February. Make sure you don't miss it. And this is a pretty easy, straightforward, formal part of it. The real challenge begins at the pre-selection part. So the pre-selection tests, you essentially have 4 so-called pre-selection tests. The ones you see on the screen: abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning, and then you have a so-called language comprehension test. This is also a multiple choice test, and it's also administered on a computer. Right now, the day of the recording of this live session, these still happen in test centers run, I believe, by the company Prometric. And these can be found in every EU member state, in the capitals, and sometimes in other large cities. So you go actually there, you sit in front of a computer, and you do your best. Right now, as we see, this is not going to change most probably. So you're not going to be able to take these multiple choice tests from the comfort of your home or a nice studio like ours, but you actually need to go to the test center. They obviously have a lot of hygiene precautions, and they make you sanitize your hands, and they clean the computers. So they do all that is necessary, but it's actually in that spot and not at home. As opposed to the assessment center, which you can pretty much do from anywhere through a computer, and that is a slightly different approach. But I'll speak about it when we get there in a few moments. So these are the 4 kind of tests. What do they look like? Most of you have probably seen many of these tests, and there are hundreds available for free on eutraining.eu. Lots are available on EPSO's website, and these are fairly well known what they look like. So verbal reasoning is certainly, there's a text passage, and then you have certain logical reasoning linked to it, and you need to pick the correct answer. In terms of timing, you have 20 questions that you need to answer in 35 minutes. So it's still quite challenging because the text can be relatively long, and the answer options you need to read, and you need to quickly process the information to make sure that you find the right answer. Now, when it comes to numerical reasoning, similar concept, 10 questions, 20 minutes. There's a chart with data, with numbers in it, and you need to do quick calculations and basically algebra operations, and then find the right answer among the options. You are given an on-screen calculator, so you can do that, but it takes time. So better to find methodology and techniques where you can quickly estimate and then find the answer which seems most likely to be accurate. This saves you time and gets you to be more efficient and ultimately reach a higher score. And then you have abstract reasoning. Cynically, I would say everyone's favorite. This tends to be the most dreaded of the 3. Well, it depends on your style, on your mindset, on your background, or how comfortable you are with these kind of exercises. So you have a sequence of images that change, rotate, turn according to a certain logic, which you need to quickly reverse engineer and then find the next in the sequence. And you have 10 questions, 10 minutes. Probably this is the most challenging one, given that you only have a minute per question, and that seems to be rather tough. So these are the 3 sort of core tests. And then you have the 4th one, the so-called language comprehension, with 12 questions and 25 minutes. So roughly 2 minutes per question, which is not exactly the same as verbal reasoning. It's less logic and more about to what degree, to what extent you master a given language from a comprehension perspective. So they will test you on your vocabulary. They will test you how well you understood a certain text. And there's a tiny bit of verbal reasoning element to it, so deducting certain points from the text, but it's essentially literacy and reading comprehension to a great degree that you are requested to, or you are tested on how well you understood a certain text. Good news is we have incredible amounts of sample tests, and not just sample, but practice tests on our website in many, many languages. So you are very welcome to check those out, and you can practice those and get a feel for it. So when you get to the competition, you're actually more familiar both with the interface and the content of the exam. So let's see the next one. Actually, this is just a summary of the scoring, but there's one very important element that you see on the screen, is that the numerical and the abstract reasoning scores are combined, and the pass mark is somewhat lower than 50%. So you can see that for the verbal reasoning, you actually have 10 out of 20, but for the numerical and the abstract, you have a slightly lower threshold. And then for the reading comprehension, you have yet another pass mark, which is a minimum score you need to reach. And that is, and I'm looking at the screen just to make sure I'm not mixing up the numbers, 7 out of 12. So this is the minimum score. But you are not just encouraged, but you kind of need to perform your best. This is a competition. So you not only compete against the pass marks, the objective thresholds, you also compete against the other candidates. So that requires you to reach a high score, because only those with the highest scores will pass to the next stage. So you do have a strong incentive to perform very well at these 4 tests, because you are measured against other candidates. And just to get an idea of how many people pass to the next phase, it's actually 7 times the number of places at the reserve list. So roughly you can calculate how many candidates will pass to the next stage. The thing is, the competition can be very diverse, because I presume far fewer people are going to choose Bulgarian as their profile or as the main language than those choosing French. But then again, it's really hard to guess, because just because a language is less widely spoken in the EU, it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be hundreds or several hundreds of those with a legal degree or lawyers in Bulgaria who are very interested in the competition, as opposed to France being a much larger country and many more people speaking French and having perhaps French legal degrees, but maybe the interest in the competition is different. So it's very hard in advance to really estimate how strong the competition is going to be. But this one at least gives you an idea that you are competing against a certain number of people, and then what chances you have as regards to how many people will pass to the next phase of the competition. And then you can see that there's a translation test. So that is a difficult test typically, because it's a legal text, and you have 2 hours to translate that from language 2 into language 1. So this is as close as it gets to a real job, when you are very likely going to be translating, and as I said, sometimes proofreading, sometimes editing, and sometimes revising legal text. But here you are requested to translate from language 2 into language 1. So essentially means from English into your chosen language 1, a legal text without a dictionary. So that's the hard part. Obviously, in the job, you are given a lot of tools in the real life setting, but at the competition, you need to do that on your own to the best of your abilities. And obviously, it's not just your vocabulary that matters. It's the style that you're using, the flow of the text, the layout that you apply, even if it's just a very basic text editor on the computer, the punctuation, the spelling, whether you finish the entire text, whether overall it flows properly, the consistency of the vocabulary that you're using, so certain terms and terminology that you translate that consistently throughout the text. All of what I told you are metrics based on which the quality of your translation will be evaluated. And I know it firsthand because many, many years ago, I was part of a selection board where we did exactly that. So we would read the translations and say, have these keywords been properly translated consistently throughout? Did the candidate finish the task within the allocated time? Is the overall flow of the text, does it sound native? Does it sound natural? Well, as much as a legal text can sound natural, but does it sound that it has a good flow and a good feel to it? So all of these are part of a high quality translation, and you will be measured on that. As you can see, you need to have at least 40 points, but then again, you're competing against other candidates as well. Let me take a quick look. I see from the corner of my eyes that there are many questions coming in. So quickly, I'll move over to my other screen to scroll down. So here's one that says, how can we prove that we have a native level of language 1 if we don't have the nationality of this particular language? Well, that's the great thing about the competition. They're not going to ask you any Delft, Delle, Oxford, or any other Cervantes Institute, whatever language certificate. You actually need to perform really well in that language. So here's the chance. This is where you prove in the translation text that you actually master that language. So going back to my previous example, if your passport is Romanian and you've lived in France all your life, you have a French legal degree, and you choose that path as French as language 1, well, here's your chance to shine and truly show that. So you don't need any other proof, so to say, other than performing well at the given task. And you don't need a formal certificate that you mastered that given language. The fact that you got a legal degree in that language is kind of a proof that you have a pretty good notion of that language. So I would have a hard time getting a degree in Bulgarian law, given my absolute lack of knowledge of that beautiful language. Next question. Here is question 5. Are we going to go through CBTs, so the computer-based tests, before checking the application documents? So having in mind that there would be no talent screener. Yes, it seems to be the case that you will need to sit the computer-based tests even before they actually check your formal documents. So your nationality, like photocopy of your ID or your passport, whatever you need to upload into the EPSO system, the degree and the title of the degree that you have. So these are probably checked after the computer-based tests and not before. So the fact that you are going to be invited to the computer-based test is great, but it shouldn't mean at that stage that all your documents have been formally vetted and checked and approved. Here's one more, and then I go on. Adding a fourth language in B2, I presume B2 refers to the level that you know a language to a certain degree. Is that an advantage? Let's put it this way. It's not going to give you extra points because it's not part of the formal criteria based on which all candidates are judged. It can help your chances at the recruitment phase if you actually have a fourth language, because they look at your profile once you are on the reserve list and say, hey, here's a candidate who actually speaks Greek, and that is a great addition because whatever reason that the recruiter has says, okay, we could definitely use a person with that knowledge, with that linguistic knowledge. So yes, perhaps later, but not during the competition phases. All right, I'll come back to the other questions, but let me try to navigate back to my slides and making sure that, oh yeah, there we go, that I can advance them properly. I know that there are many more questions, so we'll come back to those. And what else? So basically, again, it's a competition. You will need to perform really well and among the top tier in order to advance to the next stage of the competition. And then comes the assessment center. So between these phases, there are typically several weeks, maybe a month or two might pass. So you definitely have time to prepare for the next phase. Once you get to the assessment center, then it gets maybe a little more complicated. I was trying to avoid this word, but yes, it might get a little more complicated, whether it's in person or online, because at this point, now in January 2021, when we're recording this, we don't yet know how it's going to play out. But EPSO is now capable, and they've rolled out systems and platforms and processes to have the assessment center purely online. As I said before, it can happen basically from anywhere, from the comfort of your home, or you might come to our Brussels-based studio where we provide you all the infrastructure, obviously in respect of all the hygiene and EPSO rules that we're not going to help you other than giving you a great cup of coffee and lighting and secure internet. But these are the kind of formal requirements or the formal settings that you want to ensure wherever you might be doing the assessment center from. The actual content is something I'd like to speak about. assuming that all the other things around, computer and webcam and internet connection speed and whatnot are properly taken care of. And how many people actually get to the assessment center? Roughly 4 times the number of candidates that are to be placed on the reserve list. So you can do the maths. And so the previous phase, the translation part was roughly 7 times, and this is about 4 times. So what happens in the assessment center? Basically, you have 4 types of tests. And let's take a look at each of those. You probably have a few questions to look at. So one is the competency-based interview. That's the CBI, which is a pretty classic format. And many candidates already have quite a bit of understanding about it. It's, as the name suggests, it's a competency-based. And what are those competencies that you're evaluated on? You have 8 competencies, such as leadership, communication, working with others, organizing and prioritizing, analyzing and problem solving, resilience, and a few others. This is all public information, but we also have a lot of free ebooks and webinars on this topic that you might want to look up to get a deeper understanding of how that works. This is a structured interview where the assessors will ask you questions, and you need to come up from your own professional background with examples of situations where you can demonstrate those competencies that they evaluate you on. And then there is the situational competency-based interview, the SCBI. If you'd like to hear more about this, look up the recording and the soon-to-be-released transcript of our webinar that we did a couple of days ago, where I really give far more information on this. But in a nutshell, you're given a background file a week or 2 before your online session, and they ask you questions of what would you do on the basis of the situation that you are presented with in the file. So that's why it's a situational test. It's not about your background. It's about how would you act if you were in that role that is outlined in the dossier. It's slightly different, and the way you approach a problem is the most important aspect. But then again, this is something that has a methodology that you can practice for, and we're ready to help you to help to guide you in that process. But there's a lot of literature out there if you feel like Googling around and learning about those methods. And then here's the third one, the oral presentation. And this is a little unique. So oral presentation is, again, probably going to be computer-based, unless by the time it's due, the situation will be so much better and traveling to Brussels or possibly Luxembourg, but most likely Brussels, is feasible and you can do it in person. What does it look like? We'll get to it in a second because there's more information to be known about that. And then you have the 4th test, which is a summary of a legal text, which is written in language 3, and you summarize that in language 1. So again, it's somewhat of a reading comprehension, but it's not a translation. This is a summary of a text in your 3rd language that you are drafting in language 1. So these are part of the assessment center tests. And let's take a little bit of a closer look. So you have these, the scoring figures, the scores that you need to reach as a minimum, where the general competencies, so the 8 competencies I mentioned, it's pretty straightforward. You have, each is worth 10 points. So altogether 80 points, you need to have at least 40, and usually at least 3 per competency. That's pretty clear. And then you have the oral presentation. The reason why it's rather unique is because some part of it relate to the general competencies: communication, resilience, analyzing and problem solving. But other parts of the oral presentation relate to your field-specific competencies. And unfortunately, EPSO doesn't give any more information about that. What are those field-specific competencies? But essentially, there's a bit of a gray line between the term competency and knowledge. So whenever we speak about the assessment center, we typically distinguish these two, that knowledge is pretty much everything you can Google, and competency is really your skill set on communication, on working with others, delivering quality and results, and the like. But here, when we talk about domain-specific or field-related competencies, it's a bit of a gray line between these two, where you need to have a solid knowledge of EU law. You need to have, in most cases, a fairly good understanding of national law related to the language that you had chosen. So here, chances are, and again, I'm in a little bit of a speculation, so I'm pretty careful giving you very, very specific advice before we learn truly more about this. But this seems to be more knowledge-driven, and they can ask you questions about EU case law. They can ask you about certain principles of the acquis communautaire. They can ask you about certain principles or legal principles linked to the 4 freedoms. There could be things which are much more knowledge-based than truly competency-based, despite what it is being called at this point. Because they will test you on that. So you need to have that knowledge and not just be a highly competent person in the sense of having the right competencies, but you need to be knowledgeable about the legal part as well. So when you are preparing for this phase, I encourage you to revise all the core principles of EU law, even look up certain civil, criminal, administrative law ideas or knowledge from the legal system that your language covers. So you want to be prepared. If you get a question, they're probably not going to ask you, what does the civil code in France say about this and this? But certain principles linked to it can be asked, whether in a direct fashion, let's say, okay, so what does that principle say? Or say, if you were to approach this problem, how would you look at it from this angle, from this perspective? And then the pass mark here is rather high. As you can tell, that it's 60 points, and you need to have at least 30 in order to pass. All right, and ultimately, those who get the most points get ranked highest, and then they are the ones who end up on the reserve list, and from there they can be recruited. So the number of places on the reserve list is something which we already know. Reserve lists usually have a 1-year validity, but for this kind of competitions, it typically gets extended for 2 years or perhaps more until everyone from the list is actually recruited, or they express their desire not to be recruited for whatever changes in their life, which may happen by the time the request from the recruitment service actually comes in. So that's pretty much it. And how to get the job is probably the big question, but perhaps I look at 1 or 2 questions in the meantime, randomly picking, and whatever we don't have time to answer right now, then we'll follow up in a memo or a Tipcentrix article or some way. And we want to make sure that you are fully covered and all your questions are actually answered. So let's look at some questions. There's no indicative timetable for this competition. Any ideas when the psychometric testing will be scheduled? So one thing we know for sure is the application deadline, right? 23rd of February. And it's sort of a guess, probably late March, early April would be my rough guess. But it all depends really on COVID situation, depends obviously on a lot of planning issues that the institutions have or the prometric test centers have. There are a lot of moving parts in it. So I'd say roughly 4 to 6 weeks after the application deadline, you could book a computer-based test in the test center. But then again, you have then Easter, early April this year. So it might get pushed back to mid or late April. Hard to guess beyond that. When the the translation test and then the assessment center might take place, again, it gets probably closer to the summer, July-ish, or perhaps even September. So very rough guesses, but we will know probably more once the application deadline has passed. They will see how many candidates there are. and then they will release some communication on the planning. One more. Which language to complete your application in? Any tips on what is advantageous? Well, as far as I'm aware, you can complete in any of the EU's 24 languages. Now, from a practical standpoint, which language you want to complete that in, if you're comfortable with English, probably I would just choose English, just for simplicity, because if afterwards anyone looks at your profile, chances are English will be understood. Now, if for whatever reason you're more comfortable in any other language, of course you can do that, but from a practical standpoint, it might be less advised to fill that in a language which is less widely spoken. And again, with the caveat, unless stated otherwise. So they might say that you must fill in the application in English, French, or German, because these are the 3 official working languages of the institutions. So then you follow that rule, and then you probably would want to pick English. All right, is academic achievements a plus? Again, can be potentially a plus at the moment of recruitment, but not within the framework of the competition. So that could work depending on, again, the recruiter's perspective. If they say academic achievements, a PhD or publications, they might look at it from the angle that, oh, you have many publications. It kind of shows to me that you're good in writing, which is a very important part of the actual job. So that might be a plus, but others might take a different view on that. There are a lot of details before I could give you more meaningful tips on that. Maybe one more question before I go on. Is previous working experience in a particular EU institution, is it advantageous? And again, same answer, possibly a little bit, because you know more about how the EU institutions work, so that can help in your preparation and your exam performance, potentially at the moment of recruitment. But again, it's more important that you have expertise in the field, that you have a good legal and linguistic knowledge at the moment of recruitment. If you did an internship in, I don't know, the Commission's DG Trade, it doesn't have a direct impact on the quality of the work you can potentially perform. So in that regard, it may not give you any particular plus even at the recruitment. So really depends on other factors. Good. How do you suggest we train? I'm glad you asked that, because we have quite a few ideas how you can train. You might want to practice for 10 to 12 weeks with the caveat of where you are right now. And if you heard me speak on different webinars, you probably heard me say this. This is really like preparing for a sports competition. It's right now, I'm not in my best physical shape, so it would take me maybe 6 months to be totally up to speed if I were to compete in some sports event. Whereas at other times, I might be in my best shape and it only takes me a month to really focus and be the expert numerical reasoning guru, or to be my best self when it comes to linguistic comprehension. So depends on where you are, but typically 2 to 3 months of preparation is advised. And the other part is at what intensity, maybe an hour per day, maybe half an hour per day, or just every 2 to 3 days, a couple times a week. The most important is really to prepare on a regular basis. Again, just like in sports, that you cannot push yourself too strong, because then you have sore muscles. The same thing, you just burn out if you leave your preparation to the last 2 weeks. Space it out, plan it out, be consistent, and do it on a regular basis. Next one, very important. There is a method to it. There are ways when you can solve numerical reasoning, abstract reasoning, verbal reasoning tests efficiently in respect of the limited time that you are given, that you can find the right answers, because there are some methods, shortcuts, ways to quickly process the information. This is not just, okay, let me practice as much as I can and I'm going to hope for the best. There is more to it. When it comes to translation, it also has its own methodology. When it comes to the assessment center, even more so, of interview skills, presentation skills, It's rather unique these days because you are looking at a strange iron or metal or plastic device called the webcam, not really the eyes of the interviewer. So you want to practice this. You want to make sure that the dynamic flows properly despite being in a room all by yourself. So learn the methodology. We have a lot of resources, much of them free, others premium, because there is a lot of good expert advice. I encourage you to check those out and read up on it so you are performing at your best self. And then persistence really is key, is not giving up and not saying, oh, not today. Perhaps you want to form a study group and help with colleagues or others, even though formally speaking, you might be competitors. It does help keeping the motivation high. And then do lots of simulations, and whether on our site or elsewhere, try to be very comfortable with the interface, with the tests, to the extent that you're not surprised when you're sitting in the test center, you're presented the actual exam, and you are fully focused and you can concentrate and perform really well. So certainly we are here to help at EU Training. As I said, we have thousands and now tens of thousands of test questions to simulate in 19 languages. So almost regardless which language you choose, you should be able to find all those resources on our site. Language comprehension is already available in 13 languages. So hopefully that covers the vast majority of candidates and languages that you might be looking for. As I said, here's a quick list of the kind of webinars that might be relevant. We have much more than that. So we have a pretty large catalog of webinars, free and paid alike. And we're also planning live sessions. If you'd like to interact with the trainer, that is also possible. And then all those resources with ebooks and tips and tricks. And we're very happy to help you through our customer service, through events like this one, and answer your questions, whatever you may have. My colleagues are extremely competent. They've seen a lot of questions over the years. They're very happy to answer anything you have. Obviously, that's completely free of charge. So we're really here as a resource and your preparation partner. And then there are some EPSO groups that you might want to join. There's one for Lawyer-Linguist to share ideas and rumors. You might want to check out the book, the latest edition of my EU test book. The Assessment Center edition, we're planning actually a new edition, slightly updated, especially for the situational competency-based interview. And that should come out in about 2 to 3 months. So by the time you get to the Assessment Center, that should be on the bookshelves. And while I answer a couple of other questions, I leave the special 20% discount code that I had promised at the beginning. And I'll answer a few more questions that are coming in while you note this down. And you might want to share it with others who are preparing. So what else? I've answered that, I believe. Are there objective criteria when they mark the translations? So I answered it to some degree already, that there are certainly key indicators that they would look at. I won't repeat those here. You can go back to that part of the recording, or you will see it in the transcript. But this is to say that there's a method to it, and it's not just a person reading a translation and say, I'll give it 30 out of 40. Or another person reading it and say, I liked it, I'm going to give it 28. Because for that person, 28 seems a high score. So they would really have 5, 6, 10 different indicators that they look for, and each indicator would have its score value, and then they add up the scores. And typically, there would be 2 persons correcting a given translation. And if there's a large discrepancy between the scores that they give, then a 3rd person would come in and they would then find the ultimate score. So it's as objective as it can be based on a written test, which is obviously not structured to the degree that a multiple choice test could be. What else? Does EU Training provide practice material regarding translation? No, unfortunately, we don't. So I would actually just have a general advice there is take a legal text, and that could be a press release from the court's website, or very specifically a legal text of some sorts, whether it's a parliamentary resolution or a court case or a commission legal document, and translate it yourself. So that's perhaps the first step. And the second step would be do it under time pressure. Put some timing and make sure that you're simulating the exam environment, and not to use a dictionary, which is probably the hardest part. So you want to take it in steps. And again, you can join with colleagues or with others, and you might review each other's work. So this is like in academic settings, a peer review. So perhaps each of you does a separate translation, and the other person then cross-checks it for them, and then you give feedback to each other. So this is a good way of practicing. Or another way, which is actually a pretty win-win, is that you start as a freelancer, a couple of hours a week, work for a translation agency, and say, hey, if you have legal text, I'm willing to do that, even at a lower fee, because it can earn me some money, great, but at the same time, I'm actually preparing for the competition. So that could be a win-win if you have such opportunity. All right, can I just ask you, Lenka, if you can put in our private feed the questions I have not yet answered, so I can quickly take a look at that, because I see our time is up in a minute, so we will stop there once I answered a final question or two. All right, what else? Lenka says no idea. All right, fair enough. So what we'll do is probably conclude here with a big thank you to Lenka, Veronica, and a big thank you to everyone who joined today's live session. And if we find a question that I didn't cover yet, then we'll try to follow up in some way. Or if you have something more pressing and more urgent, send us an email. We'll make sure to attend to it and give you the answer. So a big pleasure. Feel free to share the recording and all these materials that I've made available and the team makes available. Tell others, and wishing you good luck for the exam. Prepare seriously. It's a tough competition, but ultimately a really interesting career path, and something, as I said, is really beneficial because you start at a higher grade than almost all other competitions, and that is something to take advantage of. So with that, thank you so much. Take good care, stay safe, and see you at our next webinar or our next event, or virtually on EU training. All right, good luck and have a nice day.